Good evening, and to those of you who are not joining us in the Eastern time zone, good afternoon. We are very pleased that you're here with us today for our Fireside chat on faith and resistance. I am Tom Dwyer. I'm the President and Executive Director of Faith That Does Justice, and we're so happy that you took some time to join us for this discussion about our respective faith traditions in terms of what is happening in our country right now, in terms of our ideals and our aspirations, both in terms of our country's values and our own religious faith values. I have with me today 4 great guests that will be talking about this matter. I know they are each eager to engage not only with each other, but with you, our audience. We are blessed to have a very large audience today. I think we have, the last I checked, well over 200 folks that had signed up for the event. I think this might actually be our largest fireside chat yet. Obviously, that reflects the importance of this matter across the country. We have folks joining us from all areas of the country, and we even have some joining us from Canada. And to our friends from Canada, I can assure you that at least this panel is not interested in having you annexed to the United States. As we go along, if you have questions or comments, please enter them in the question and answer box as part of the Zoom live stream. I have a colleague that will be reviewing those questions and answers, or questions and comments as they come in, and we'll share those and have a discussion on some of those hopefully towards the end of our session this evening. In preparing for this, many of you who registered made some comments about what you would like to see discussed, both today and in future fireside chats. We thank you for that. But to pick up right on that, I'd like to mention one particular comment that came forward. A woman wrote that she feels overwhelmed at this time, and that she in fact despairs of hope. She wrote something to the effect of, "Is there any hope left for humanity?" Well, I certainly believe there is hope left for humanity, and I think all of our panelists will believe that there is hope left for humanity too. We'll be talking about that. These are obviously very abnormal times. Just this morning, when I listened to the news, I heard our president talk about the war in Iran, and he was talking about negotiations, and he made a statement that, among other statements that he makes, are just so shocking to hear coming from a president of our United States. He said, "If we don't reach negotiation, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts away." Presidents don't talk like that. We don't talk like that as people of faith. These are serious matters. People are losing their lives. Human dignity is being ignored. We'll be talking about all of these things during the coming hour or so with you. So we're again very pleased to join you. So without any further comment from me, we want to get right into our conversation. I'd like to start with Rabbi James. James Green is the CEO of the Jewish Family Services of Western Massachusetts. I'm happy to say he is our newest board member, and we are pleased to have you on the board, Rabbi James. Jewish Family Services is, among other things, one of the largest refugee settlement agencies in Massachusetts. And notably for this particular conversation, they just recently filed a suit against the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, or formerly the Secretary of Homeland Security, no longer, but against them regarding refugee resettlement matters, in particular the green card. While we won't be delving deep into that, it's notable. I don't believe you've taken these kinds of actions before, Rabbi Green, is that correct?
No, we have never taken an action like that before.
So we want to start really with that. I also just want to mention that he is also a member, he was a former board member of the Reconstructing Judaism Rabbinical Association. So we're very, very pleased to have you with us. So let's go back to not so much the particulars of the lawsuit, but let's go to the reason you felt that you needed to move from your traditional service model and go into a legal action against the federal government. What prompted you to move from that to an action like this?
In Jewish tradition, there is an understanding, a belief that we have a sacred obligation to protect the people that we care for, to protect the people that we serve. The Department of Homeland Security's policy, which allowed for the unlawful detention of lawfully resettled refugees, solely for the lack of a green card because of a manufactured paperwork delay, strikes at the heart of what it means to protect the community that we serve. And as we read the policy, I read the policy as it was released while I was in a USCIS office with a client who was, I had accompanied a client for a re-interview, which is in and of itself a highly unusual process. And I thought about the 1,100 other clients that we have who, for no fault of their own, have not been issued a green card, have not been issued lawful permanent residence documents, which they were promised and are entitled to. As we considered that, it became clear that we had to step in, we had to step forward. And as one of my board members said to me that night, if we are going to ask our clients to stand in the breach of the federal government, we should be standing right next to them. I actually want to address the comment that you received about hopelessness. In one of my favorite psukim, one of my favorite verses from Proverbs says that we'll lay down in moments of darkness and we'll rise up and there will be joy and light. Next week, the Jewish community is going to be observing the holiday of Passover. It's during the holiday, at the Seder meal, there's a retelling of the 10 plagues. And interestingly, in Jewish tradition, there's a break in the reading, in the biblical scriptural reading, right around the plague of darkness, and it's notable that we take a break there before we continue on in the biblical reading. It is darkest before the dawn, and this is a moment that feels really dark. It feels it's understandable to be dismayed or hopeless or fearful or angry, and I don't think that we can live there. The Jewish community has seen over the long arc of its history the ability for us to move from places of darkness to places of light, and I believe firmly that's what we need to do here. That's where we need to be putting our energy. So I share that feeling. I understand that feeling. I think it's okay to be in that moment. But for me, it is an act of faith to say that we recognize that it can be dark, and that light will still come. As perhaps the greatest American president, President Bartlett from the West Wing, said, right? Like it's always darkest before the dawn, and we will find that light.
Right. And you've written Rabbi James has written a number of pieces for our weekly word, and you've written most eloquently about the need for hope and some of the very dark times that we have. Before we move to Sarah, I just want to follow up, though, on the status of this suit. Mevluda, her organization, International Refugee Assistance Project, is actually counsel to your organization
Thank
and
God.
to all the plaintiffs, which includes 6 individuals.
It does.
There is brand new news, as I understand. Would you take a second and tell us what the brand new news is about the suit?
I would love to. I don't want to take away from the fabulous win for Rabbi Green and his organization, without whom we wouldn't have been able to bring this lawsuit. But we did get news yesterday that the government, in a really uncommon situation actually, did not respond to our lawsuit, and the judge in fact granted relief and has blocked this harmful policy from taking effect. So as of now, refugees who have been in the country for more than a year are safe from this arbitrary detention policy that the government was seeking to implement to terrorize refugee communities. So we're very grateful for that decision, and congratulations to everybody.
Congratulations to everybody that's involved. Obviously, we'll see what happens as a result of this. We've seen a lot of district courts act that way, and then to be overturned or whatever happens later on when it gets up before the Supreme Court. But the fact that you're bringing the action, that you're supporting the action, really needs to be recognized. Even as sad as it is that we have to go to these kinds of extremes to protect fundamental rights. We won't delve greatly into this, but just as a further explanatory comment, essentially, and please both of you correct me if I'm wrong here, but essentially what's happening with this is the government changed the rules and said now that if you don't have your green card by a year, you can be subject to deportation and arrest. But at the same time, as I understand it, you can't apply for a green card until you've been here for a year. So if there's a classic catch-22 that the government is deliberately placing refugees who've been extensively vetted in, this is it. It's, again, in my terminology, cruelty for the sake of cruelty. There's no rational basis for it. But let's come back to that a little bit later. Let's jump to Sarah. So Sarah Hansman is with us. She is a Boston leader who I just became acquainted with, leading an initiative, nationwide initiative, Season of Faithful Witness is what it's called. And she is leading this grassroots movement here in Boston, along with her colleagues across the country. You probably should take a second and check that out on the internet to learn more about it. She's also a doctoral student at Boston College in theological ethics. She is a hospital chaplain, and she is active in prison ministry, among other things, to keep her busy while she's doing her doctoral studies. She also had to get special permission from her professor tonight to get here a few minutes early to be able to join us, and she tells me she's jumping on a call momentarily with her Season of Faithful Witness colleagues to talk about that. So you can see that she's a committed young Catholic, and we're so proud and pleased to have you with us and proud of you of the work that you're doing. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Season of Faithful Witness and what has prompted you and others to launch this. Why are you doing this now? Why at this time? What's propelling you to move in this direction?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Tom, and thanks for having me amongst such impressive people on such an important topic. So I guess I'll answer by way of the initial comment that you shared about despair. I'm Catholic. Ignatian spirituality is a tradition within Catholicism that really forms me and moves me. And there's a concept in Ignatian spirituality called magis, which in Latin means the more. And it's not more in quantity or being the best. It is about how do I use my particular gifts, given the context that I'm in and the need that I find, in a way to love God and love others more. And I have been asking that question through the question, what is mine to do? And so I ask, what is mine to do? What is mine to do? And my answer consistently is responding to this moment as a person of faith, as a Christian, and as a Catholic. And so I have gotten into some faith-based community organizing on immigration, specifically last year, a Good Friday public witness that was ecumenical, so with other Christian communities. And something that I learned, two things. One is that my Protestant siblings are so impressive and really know how to mobilize. And the other is that it was really difficult to get Catholics out. And I've been thinking about this a lot as a lay woman myself, about what it means to hold authority and agency in the Catholic Church. And I think it's easy, given our hierarchical structure, to look upward for direction. What does my pastor say? What does my bishop say? What does the Pope say? And thus, what ought I to do? But I believe strongly, luckily through my studies and peers who have empowered me as a layperson, that I have authority and agency to act rooted in this robust Catholic social tradition that is incredibly pro-migrant. And so I've been thinking about this over the past year. Boston, mind you, is the fourth largest archdiocese in the nation, 1.8 million Catholics, over 250 parishes. Wow. And I just kept thinking, what a powerful place I'm in. What would it look like if we could mobilize Catholics? And then I learned of this national campaign called the Season of Faithful Witness, which almost is just that. It is a campaign trying to empower local communities, grassroots communities, parishes, organizations to come together and live out their commitment to their faith in the public square, specifically against violent policies in our nation and for the universal human dignity of all people, and specifically in this moment, against the attacks against our immigrant neighbors. And so I reached out, and often when you reach out, you get voluntold to do something. And so I am now co-coordinating the Boston chapter alongside my co-coordinator, Diana Marin. And what we're hoping to do is not just respond in this Lenten season. I think this season is, for many traditions, such a holy one, and an opportunity where folks might be more likely to act and move and feel compassion, but also to go beyond that, to connect and build an ecosystem within the Boston Catholic community so that we know our neighbors. I think that's a lesson learned from Minneapolis that we can talk about. But if we know our neighbors, Catholic and otherwise, what power could we have? And what could we do? And so we're starting with this Saturday. We're gathering together as a community, praying the Stations of the Cross on the way to No Kings. Next Friday, on Good Friday, we're hosting our second Good Friday public worship and action for immigration justice. And then we're really open, as grassroots movements are, to see where it takes us, but really rooted in relationships, in knowing our own power, and in the powerful social voice that the Catholic Church does have.
Thank you, Sarah. So we should also note, talking about the holy season, Ramadan just ended as well. So you're right, this is a special time. And as I understand Ramadan, social justice is a part of the Ramadan experience, a recommitment to social justice as well. And but I wanted to be sure we mentioned that while we were talking about this. You also mentioned, Sarah, and I want to jump to Father Steve here. You mentioned what you saw, and I agree, as a frustration about Catholics participating in some of these ecumenical movements and taking a firm and forthright stand. We have with us Father Steve, who is just the antithesis of that. Father Steve has been the pastor of St. Susanna's Parish in Dedham, Massachusetts for 25 years. That in itself is a rarity. I am told by many people that he is beloved in his parish. I think I know why, having gotten to know Father Steve. He's a priest of the Archdiocese and a former friend of our founder, Father Peter. I also want to just comment briefly on the parish, because it's important, I think, for our discussion in light of what you were saying, Sarah, for us to understand that the parish is a suburban, white, I guess middle-class parish, I would say, Father. Yet your parish has a long history of social activism, and most recently in December, you garnered national attention, huge attention throughout Massachusetts, when your parish, in its outdoor display, its Christmas creche, you replaced the statues of baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph with a sign that said, ICE was here. That's faithful witness, I guess. That's public witness. Your parish stood with you.
Yes.
Tell us about how your parish can take these stances. I think it's extraordinary what you did and what your parish did. What prompted you to do it? What motivated you to do it? And how did your parish react? And what reactions did you get from others across the country? Because it was national news. It made the New York Times.
It was around the world, surprisingly. It started about, I'd say 9-10 years ago. We were having a Pax Christi meeting one evening. It was during the Advent season. It's before the stable would ordinarily go up. And there was a time when it seemed that there was mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. And we were frustrated. It was a dark time. And whenever that happened, there was always it was always thoughts and prayers. It was always what people would talk about. You weren't allowed to discuss it beyond that. It was just a time for thoughts and prayers. And we noticed that there was a mass shooting about once every day and a half. It's about every 36 hours. There's one in this country. And I'm not sure how the idea had originated, but we thought, as we put the stable up this year, it's the season of the incarnation when the divinity became flesh. And what would that look like in this particular context? So we had put some placards with some of the mass shooting sites with the numbers of who were killed, next to them, and just to juxtapose that with the season that we were in. And we learned quickly that that's a powerful symbol and a powerful statement. And sometimes art can convey something which words and policies and statements can't. And it got quite a reaction. So for the last several years, I think since then, we've tried to mirror every year what's going on in the world with this particular season of incarnation. And this year, Parish Refugee Committee had been working, we work with 4 parishes in Dedham. There's the St. Paul's Episcopal Church, the Allen Congregational, and the First Church Unitarian. And we've been welcoming refugees since 2017, I believe. We've welcomed 11 families so far. And with the current situation of ICE, we thought we had to say something. And we didn't just remove the statues, we put them into the church. They were in a safe place. So they were in front of the altar, so people could enjoy them there. But there was a sign outside which said ICE was here, and the family is safe in the sanctuary of the church. And if you see ICE, to call Luce, which we thought everyone should have.
You need to explain what Luce is.
Yes, it's an organization which really advocates for immigrants, and especially in this environment of ICE and abductions and whatnot. If you see something, you should call. They'll tell you what to do, what not to do, how to keep people as safe as possible. And we contacted Luce first to ask if it was all right to do that, and they were delighted with that. So we had their phone number was also there. And we weren't expecting the reaction. We didn't contact any newspapers or any TVs, but within about a day, it just exploded. And I'm always astounded at how art and symbols can sometimes reach a place and move people in ways that statements and ordinary things just can't seem to do. The reaction was, from around the world, surprisingly, it was 100% positive. In this country, it was very divided. It was divided according to political lines, I would say. And but it was overwhelmingly supportive. It was quite remarkable. And certainly our community stood behind that. And
And did you have any problems with your parish community, Father?
The parish community, no.
And what do you attribute that to, Father?
We're a parish that's we're on an island in the middle of the Charles River. Most people don't realize that. I call it the island of misfit toys. We're a little bit of an unusual parish. We have people who are registered there from 55 different zip codes, which is a little bit extraordinary in the Catholic world. I would say most of them, it might be their last stop on the Catholic train, so to speak. And they are, it's people who go by choice, and they're gospel-driven people, and they really look out for the people on the margins of life, and in so many instances, it's people who take their faith seriously. They choose to be there. We have a lot of different ministries across the board, but that particular ministry, we see a lot of frustration, a lot of fear, and some of our folks who have been documented in illegal are threatened with their status, which changes almost day by day now, especially with the Afghanistans and the Hondurans
Sure.
So they
want to return probably a little later to that gospel-driven community idea. That's so important, I think. Mevluda, finally, I get to you, even after having not introduced you, but asked you to make some comments. So, Mevluda is, as mentioned earlier, is a senior staff, well, I guess I didn't actually explain, but she's a senior staff attorney with the International Refugee Assistance Project. I got it right this time, which I've just learned about, and I encourage all our viewers to check out. It's an impressive organization. Mevluda is a Muslim attorney. She has represented hundreds of clients, immigrants, in actions before the federal government. Her organization is supporting the lawsuit that we talked about earlier, and Mevluda is actually lead counsel on a very similar lawsuit, Pasito versus Trump, I believe is what it's called. You are working for those in need from the legal perspective. How do you see all of this, how do you see the law affecting what's happening? It almost seems like the law is trying to take the place of morality right now. That maybe is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it sometimes feels that way to me. How do you look at this from your own background and in terms of the law as well?
First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here and to be among such inspiring folks. And with you, Tom, that's a very complex question, so I'm going to break it down as I see fit. And I just want to say that I've been inspired by all of the things that my co-panelists have already said. So apologies if I jump around a little bit. But first of all, I just wanted to piggyback off something that Father Steve just mentioned about how the legal status of people is shifting day to day as a result of this current administration, and people who maybe were not undocumented yesterday and had legal status are now having their status at risk. And I think it's important to note we're only a year and 2 months into this administration, but I just
it's hard to believe.
It's really hard to believe, and I want to paint a picture of kind of this slew of policies that my organization, IRAP, has been challenging thus far, just to kind of paint a picture of what we're dealing with here. And I'll say that this is only a slice of what has come out of this administration so far. So on day one, we had the refugee ban, which basically shut down the admission of refugees to the United States. Then a few weeks later, we had this new program set up by the president that would prioritize white Afrikaners from South Africa to come into the United States. And then we've had this just precipitating attack on people who are already in the United States and trying to strip their legal status from them. So there's a status called temporary protected status, which people who happen to be in the United States whenever their country is undergoing war or a natural disaster, the country is then designated by the administration such that people who are in the United States are protected from deportation to those countries where they would face, where they literally cannot return to because of the state of the countries. We've seen this administration steadily remove that status from each of those countries whenever they have been up for redesignation. So we're talking about countries like Syria, Haiti, Afghanistan, countries where people right now cannot go back to. And then with refugees, in the case that Rabbi Green's organization is challenging, that we brought the lawsuit in, we're seeing refugees who were invited to this country and went through years of processing and interviews and had to go to third countries and live in refugee camps for years while they were being vetted and screened, and were then invited into our country and underwent extreme vetting to come here. They're now on, as you so eloquently put at the start of this conversation, are faced with this impossible situation where they're only allowed to apply for a green card on day 365, and then on day 366 are at risk of being detained. So we have people who they've done everything correctly, they have legal status, but they are at risk of getting that status stripped away from them, and there's absolutely no regard to their Fourth Amendment rights to be free from seizure and unreasonable seizure. They haven't violated any immigration laws, and the fact that we have an administration that sees fit to arrest people whenever they haven't committed any crime or violated any laws is something that I think should scare everybody, because once that precedent is set, where do we go from there? I mean, who is next? And we should all be concerned by the attacks that, I mean, before the administration used to talk about legal immigration versus, people who aren't in legal status. Now they are very plainly and openly going after people who have legal status. And I think that's a really dangerous trend. I don't want to take up too much time, but I know that you had also asked the question about, the faith perspective,
Right.
and
Please.
I'm certainly not a scholar like Sarah or a faith leader, but I can share, some inspiration that I get from my own Muslim faith.
No, please.
And the story that Father Steve shared really resonated, because my Irish Catholic grandmother used to put up her stable every year,
Yeah.
and I think
Take a minute and tell everyone, where are you from originally?
Well, I'm from Northern Ireland.
Right. And Belfast, right?
Yes, I'm from Belfast, and half of my family is Catholic, and I was raised by my mother and father, my mother is a revert from Catholicism to Islam, and holds really, spiritual beliefs, and was very instrumental in kind of imparting those to me and my sisters as we were growing up. And I think it is important to kind of link this kind of our social justice struggles to our kind of faith background. And I can offer one story from the Islamic tradition that
Sure.
I think really resonates when we're talking about welcoming refugees. And that's one of the first stories whenever the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, first started preaching about Islam, and he was persecuted because of his religion by his own tribe and members of his community. And he fled from that city to another city nearby called Medina. And whenever he was traveling there with his kind of disciples, upon arrival, the people who resided in that city, they were called the Ansar, the helpers. The children sang this song to welcome essentially these refugees fleeing religious persecution into their community. And it's a song that actually a lot of Muslim children learn. It's one of the first songs that we learn growing up. And it's a song about welcoming refugees. And he paired each refugee with a helper from this community that they were joining, and each Ansar or helper brought a migrant into their home, and they lived together, and they shared food, and they shared their homes, and that really solidified this new community, and that's where the new community grew from. And it was really about welcoming a refugee into your home and sharing everything that you have with them, and many of them even kind of divided up their land and their belongings. And it reminds me of some of the kind of programs that our refugee resettlement agencies here in the United States undertake, where whenever refugees arrive, you're paired, and I'm sure Rabbi Green can speak to this, there are systems or programs where you can, families can kind of assist a refugee family and do things like, drive them to appointments and help them kind of build up their lives, in addition to the resettlement structure that our government also provides. But I thought that was, really compelling kind of comparison, and people want to do this,
People
and
do
people
want
here
to do
want
that.
to be involved.
One of the things that we hear all the time at A Faith That Does Justice, and which was reinforced by the comments when people signed up, is tell me how we can act, tell me how we can help, what can we do? You, both Father Steve, with the work that you do with the other parishes, your work as well, and then your example here. I mean, these are things that people concretely can do, and it's being done all across the country, really. I mean, if they're talking again about hope, the way people are coming together, if folks get a chance, a little plug for our weekly word today, read the story of Rabbi Amy from Minnesota and what she experienced in Minnesota with her family. I don't know if any of you had a chance to read it, but there's an example of how people just sprung up and responded. So anyhow, let's get to a couple of other questions here and have some open discussion now without focusing on anyone in particular. So one thing I'd like to address is this notion that I hear an awful lot, especially in Catholic circles. I don't know how prevalent it is in Islamic circles or in Judaism, but one of the things I hear all the time is that politics and religion don't mix. Now, I strongly disagree with that. In fact, both Pope Leo, going all the way back to the beginning of the Catholic social teaching, and our own current Pope Leo and Pope Francis, and a whole variety of popes from both conservative and liberal say just the opposite. In fact, you need to be engaged. But I'd like to ask, what is it, and just to I guess further outline or frame the situation, we also have right now a situation where our federal government is interjecting religion directly into politics. Our Secretary of Defense, or War as he likes to be called, sadly, but is talked about the war in Iran as likening it to the Holy Crusades. The president carries a Bible around, upside down, but he carries a Bible around and makes comments as if he's well-versed in his upside-down Bible. J.D. Vance is always, our vice president is always talking about religion. How do you see religion and politics? What role and how do they intersect? And how should we be thinking about this at this critical moment? Who would like to start? Sarah, looks like you're ready to start.
I'll start.
All right,
I'll
good.
start. Well, I want to make, I think, two comments. First is to speak to what's going on in our current administration and the use of religion in our current administration, which unfortunately, I think it's important to name, coming from a Christian background, this is not a new thing. Throughout the history of Christianity, really since 300, when we allied with the Roman Empire, there has been there's a sociologist named Peter Berger who calls this religious canopy, which is when we use religion to legitimize structures and systems and ways of being that are violent. And so one example I think we can point out in the United States is the way that Christianity was used to justify slavery for generations and generations and generations.
Good
and
point.
so
Good point.
Unfortunately, this is not, I would say for me as a Christian and a Catholic, what I see is needing to name this as a pattern. It is a sin, I would say, of my tradition that I must repent for and name and account for. But I don't think the answer is to leave and cede the public square to white Christian nationalism as it exists in our nation today. For me, what's really, really important is to provide a strong counter witness of another way to be, for me, Catholic or Christian or a person of faith. I didn't grow up particularly religious, and it was seeing in my undergrad, seeing a version of Catholicism that was liberative and life-giving. And I think as for why religion ought to be in the public square at all, there's so many things we can name, like the strong Catholic social teaching tradition that you already named, Tom. We can look to liberation theology. Today is this 46th anniversary of the death of Oscar Romero, who was assassinated, now a saint in El Salvador for speaking out during the Civil War. But I think just bringing it back to basics, the reason that I would say we ought to be political is Jesus Christ, who entered into public ministry and 3 years later was executed by the Roman Empire as a civil dissident. Crucifixion was used as a form of execution, specifically either for slaves who had escaped or for those who were seen as rebels against the empire. And so it's not that Jesus was in party politics. He was not his days Democrat or Republican, but his way of engaging, of overturning social relations and norms, engaging with people who were marginalized and oppressed on, I would say, both sides of the aisle. It's often talking about, we hear about Jesus engaging and eating with tax collectors. And I always wondered as a kid, like, why are we, what does it matter? But tax collectors were Jews working for the Roman Empire, who was the occupier at that time. And so they were seen as folks who were betraying their own communities. And so he was both welcoming as his disciples tax collectors and, quote, sinners and prostitutes, folks who were on really the outskirts of society. And so at its most basic, if Christianity's tenets are love God and love your neighbor, for me, so long as we exist in a community, loving your neighbor and how to love your neighbor is a political act.
Rabbi James.
Sure.
What
I'll
are your
follow
thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, in the Hebrew Bible, it says that you should love your neighbor once, right? It says you should welcome the stranger 36 times. And it invites us into that work, not because it is easy, but because it is complex and challenging and nuanced. But I don't think it's political. I'm of the belief that our faith traditions call us into the public square to engage in meaningful ways, to show up for people. We've talked about the different ways that faith calls us to show up for folks. So my faith doesn't tell me that it's critical for me to be a Democrat or a Republican or a conservative or a progressive. It tells me that it's important to be engaged, right? That this work of welcoming in whatever way that we do that is part of what it means to lead a faithful life. I do think about moments where our faith has called us into to show up in moments that have pushed us in our politics. I think about Rabbi Prinz showing up to stand and to march with Dr. King, and he famously said that neighbor is not a geographic term, but is rather a moral concept that talks about our belief in human dignity.
I love that concept.
It is it's for me the kind of faithful engagement in Jewish tradition emanates from the teachings of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who also was a refugee and became a leader in the American Civil Rights Movement. He notably marched with Dr. King in Selma on Shabbat as an Orthodox Jew, which was considered almost unthinkable. And in doing so, he engaged in this, what I think you might argue was an act of politics, but I would argue actually is an act of faith and is an act of showing up. He wrote to Dr. King after that experience that he felt like his feet were praying. And to me, that's the work that faith leads us into politics. It leads us into because politics is how we engage in the community square. My daughter, Talia, 2 weeks ago, traveled to Washington, D.C. with a program with her synagogue, with the Religious Action Center, to spend a weekend in Washington, D.C., where she had the opportunity to meet with her congressional representatives, to engage with staff members, to learn not about what she should believe or how she should believe, but why it's important from a faith perspective to engage. When she came back, she reflected on the importance of that learning opportunity as someone who's getting ready to graduate high school, God willing, and step into the world and do really meaningful, holy work in her life. But I remember in January of last year, I took her with me on a Friday night, January 17th, to go to the airport to meet what would be the last family that we at JFS were going to resettle before the transition in the federal administration. And the reason she came with me is that she speaks Spanish and I do not. And because there was a young girl who was coming on, who was in that family, who was about 10 days older than Talia. And when we had this experience, as Mifluda talked about, of picking up this family and driving them to a host family who was gonna share space with them and host them initially for a couple of weeks, and ended up hosting this family for a few months as this family settled in the United States, settled into their new home. And they talked about all kinds of things, my daughter and this other young woman, in the car ride about an hour to the host home. And on the way back, Talia looked at me and said she understood this teaching. She felt like she knew what it meant for her feet to be praying. Right? That's what politics should call us to in this world, and that's how we show up in America and in free society. That's how we show up for people that we care about.
Well, I think my favorite definition of politics is that politics is the dogged pursuit in a secular society of the common good. And we lose sight of that when we engage right now. And right now, I mean, the dysfunction that is happening.
Amen.
Father, how does your parish understand politics?
There is so much to echo from what I've just heard, and there's so much to say about that. It's a topic that usually gets people talking about. It all depends where they're coming from. I think if they agree with your advocacy of certain issues, they would uphold it to the nth degree, and if they don't, they should tell you that you should be quiet. I found that to be almost universally true. But how you change people's minds and hearts, I think that Jesus did that by his example, and I love the example of the both sides. He was on both sides. He erased almost every border that was imaginable. And in the Catholic tradition, we have a tradition when you begin the liturgy on Sunday, you carry the Word of God in. It doesn't get carried out. People might not notice that. And we stand for the gospel. And the reason we stand for the gospel isn't because it's more sacred than the other readings. It's because we're to take that word with us with our feet as we go. I love that analogy of our feet into the marketplace. And if we don't do that, it doesn't make much sense. I think Karl Barth was one of the most prominent theologians of the last century, and he had a great statement that when you preach, You have to have one foot in the gospel and 1 foot in the world. And to not have that, it doesn't make much sense. It doesn't really work. It just doesn't work. You have to really do both. And it's interesting. In this country, I think people have this misperception that the separation between church and state would make us be quiet on certain issues. It has to do with the state side of things. The reason if a church has every right to speak on any issue, I think Jesus flipped those tables in the temple at one point, which is what got him into trouble. On Palm Sunday, which we'll be celebrating next week, in those days, a leader would ride into a town on a stallion to show that they had brought peace. And the peace which they brought was done by the execution or the destruction of your enemies. But Jesus does political theater. He rides in on a donkey, and his way is a way of nonviolent love. It's the total opposite. That kind of flips things upside down.
Right.
And I think that he used politics in that way in the best possible sense. And in the world today, if a church should apply for a tax exempt status, in that case, in light of if they granted that, at that point they are not supposed to involve in partisan politics because of the tax exempt status, not because that they're a church or a religion.
Right.
And surprisingly, this president, one thing he did, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but he eliminated the Johnson Amendment so that condition is no longer there, and churches are free to speak out as they see fit. In the Archdiocese, they ask us not to do that still. We refrain from partisan politics, but I can't imagine preaching without having 1 foot in the gospel and 1 foot in the...
Partisan politics and preaching, as you said, with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Those are two different things. And I think that's really an important point. And I love that other comment about neighbor. That's a term I use all the time, neighbor. But the idea that neighbor is not geographic, it's a moral term. I mean, that's really a profound observation when we think about that. Everyone is our neighbor. Let me switch a little bit in terms of our focus here. I want to go back. I'm Catholic, so you'll have to forgive me on this, but I just recently learned about something that St. Augustine wrote, one of the great doctors of the church. And he wrote something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, that the state is nothing but a band of robbers without justice. That is really interesting. And I've always liked this other quote from Thomas Aquinas about what is justice, because the term we throw around all the time, justice, justice, as if everybody knows what justice is. As an attorney, you probably know that there's lots of different views of what justice is. But Thomas Aquinas says a justice can be defined as a habit. First, it's a habit whereby a man renders to each one his due. So his due, which I tend to think of basic inherent dignity, by a constant and perpetual will. So it's not a single court decision, it's constant and perpetual, and it requires perseverance. So I'm going to ask Mevludi, if you might start us off and tell us how you, from a legal perspective, and as part of an organization that, by my count at least, when I looked on your website, has 17 active cases contesting actions of the federal government. Not to say all the ones that you're monitoring and have in the pipeline, but 17 active ones. How do you think about justice and morality in a court of law? The Catholic bishops just filed a friend of the court brief on the birthright citizenship case, where they interwove scripture and Catholic social teaching and the law. Where does one begin? Where does one end? And what do we do in this moment? An easy question for you.
No pressure.
Totally. I would have thought that you'd ask one of our theologians first, but
No, I want to.
Legal, please.
Yeah, thank goodness.
well, I mean, you mentioned amicus briefs, so I'm going to have to start with talking about amicus briefs and the importance of those in our lawsuits. And I think that that gave me an easy entry, by the way, so thank you for doing that. I mean, for those who don't know, an amicus brief, whenever we file lawsuits in court, they're brought on behalf of the plaintiffs. So, for example, in the case that we just filed with JFS, Rabbi Green's organization, we had 6 individuals who were impacted by this harmful policy, and also the organization who was also harmed because it was preventing them from doing their work. But it's important that whenever we bring lawsuits challenging these really systematic issues that affect so many people, that we bring in all the perspectives and that we provide the court with a range of perspectives so that the court can assess the issue with a view to how this is going to play out in real life, and really hear from the experts, which a lot of times faith-based organizations are able to provide an expert voice. So I think you mentioned the Catholic bishop's amicus brief in the birthright citizenship case, where the Trump administration is essentially trying to make this really novel and outrageous claim that people who are born in the United States aren't entitled to citizenship and don't attain citizenship on being born here. And aside from the fact that that goes against the spirit of the 14th Amendment and why that was enacted in the first place, and it's important for organizations to bring in other perspectives as to why that is morally reprehensible. And I think that's what faith-based organizations who provide these arguments in amicus briefs can do. And I will say that this is a theme that we're seeing with this administration, that that the administration is upending decades of the way in which the law has been applied and coming up with interpretations that really go against the spirit of what the laws say and what they were intended to provide for, and also destroys the predictability of the law. So as Father Steve mentioned at the start, from day to day the law can shift because we are being confronted with these really disingenuous interpretations.
If I might add, a law that is continually shifting is essentially not a law. Agreed?
I mean, it's very hard to imagine a society where from administration to administration the meaning of the law could change, and that is essentially what this administration is trying to do with these really unpredictable
obviously
shifting.
law evolves, and properly so. Teaching evolves. But the whipsaw that we have really destroys any predictability, any way to structure life, to structure community. It's chaos is what it is.
That's not justice.
That's not justice.
That's cruelty.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
In Jewish tradition, the idea of tzedek, of justice, is not just. It's not a singular act. It is a repetitive process that helps us clarify what is morally right, and how we stand up and stand alongside those in our community who are at risk and who are in need. That it is, the word in Hebrew, tzedakah, which is often translated as charity, is a misnomer. It's tzedakah comes from the shoresh, the root tzedek. It's about not about giving charitably. It's about giving justly, right? It's about thinking about how in each moment we can make decisions that will make the world more whole, that will make the world more perfect. Different faith traditions have different beliefs in terms of how we get to that moment of perfection, whether it's about the resurrection and return of Jesus, or whether it's about actions that we take in there's a Yiddish story that's humorous, which says there was a man who was assigned the task, who was given a job to wait outside the city gates for the Messiah. And his brother came to town and visited him and said, "Why are you taking this job? It's not a prestigious job. It's not a great paying job." And he said, "Sure, the job is not so prestigious, but it's permanent, right? That the work is about continually making the world more perfect, such that we could be worthy of receiving that kind of perfection, such that we could actually perfect the world. It's not about an end result, but about a journey that we travel together and that we travel in community. And it's not about things that we do necessarily on a large scale. Justice is about individual actions that support individual people. Behind the work that Mafluda does and the holy work that IRAP is doing, it is certainly to protect refugee communities and other populations, but it's about each individual person, right? Each individual family that's welcomed in this country because of the work that Mafluda has done personally, right? That work translates into a family that we received, that is building a life of meaning and of safety and security here in Massachusetts because of the work, because of the just work that Mafluda is doing.
So we have about 15 minutes before we get to our question and comment section. So I'd like to ask each of you a couple of more hard questions, if you don't mind. So, Father, I'd like to start with you. So, and this is not solely my question, although it's my question that is always percolating around, but it came from a number of people who signed up as well. And Sarah, you alluded to this in a sense. And we talked about it too, with 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the gospel. So often, at least in my experience, and I think it's largely true in the Catholic experience, that we go to Mass on Saturday or Sunday, and we hear 1 foot in the gospel, but the other foot is like right there, almost in the world, but the pastor or the priest can't quite get there. It just can't get there. Obviously, that's not how you preach, but what is going on here? Why can't we get there? I have often looked at canon, well, not often looked at canon law, but I heard and I looked at canon law, and canon law has in section 528 of the pastor, he is the pastor. He is to foster works through which the spirit of the gospel is promoted. That's fine. But there's another phrase here, even in what pertains to social justice. And the word even is used as if, pastor, even in social justice, you're supposed to do this.
Yes.
Do they do this? What happens, Father? Why?
That's how it ought to be, I think. I think in the past, we always got word from on high that if we meddled into politics, we could lose our tax exempt status. And so I think for a while that was something which people used as a leverage just to kind of keep the temperature down a bit. But they always talked about certain issues, for sure. I've speaking to other denominations, but other pastors of churches, there was a tendency to not speak up because of a fear of dividing their own community or of losing their congregants. There have been examples. I remember when Cardinal O'Malley first came to Boston, he told the story of when he was down in South America, and he was in some parish, and he was preaching in a vein that was farther marginalized, and the entire church had walked out on him, except for one soldier who remained. And he kiddingly said to the soldier, "Are you here to shoot me now?" You know. But his point was, we speak the gospel in season and out of season. Now, why that isn't the case across the board, I can't answer that. It's a difficult thing to. It isn't a difficult thing to do when you do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's.
And it seems to me, in places where I see that it's done, that folks rally. I mean, there, to me, is a yearning for that.
Yeah.
And it's only takes a little spark to set that on fire. And that's what's so frustrating. Sarah.
Yes.
I hope you
Tom.
don't mind me referring to you as a young person.
Honored.
Okay.
Resident young person here.
And a very articulate one in explaining your thoughts. You've done a very, very nice job this evening helping us understand. I want to ask you about young people. Okay. Historically, young people have been the agents of change, fundamental change, major change. I don't know that I see them in the forefront right now. And of course, there's the movement of young people away from faith as it is, of all kinds, in all areas. Give us your perspective on this.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Okay, I won't speak for all young people, but I want to both challenge that and I want to provide a little analysis for why it also might be partially true. So a little both and here. What I do think young people are engaged and have been engaged. I think it looks different. I think every generation their engagement looks different. But like, I want to just give a couple examples of young Gen Z. I'm right at the cusp. I'm millennial, but right at the cusp of Gen Z engagement. One, I think young folks have been at the forefront of the pro-Palestinian movement. I'm thinking about sit-ins and protests on college campuses in 2024. And I'm thinking about like real persecution of students such as Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia or Rameza Ozturk at our own Tufts University, who were visa holders and were detained coming out of these actions. I think about climate and young people's work in the climate movement that has really been prophetic. I can give a local example. So this past summer in Milford, Massachusetts, a student named Marcelo Gomez was detained on his way to volleyball practice. And his school walked out of school every day, and that pressure led to his release within 5 days. And so I do think there are young people engaged and involved. Now, to your point, I was looking at some of the statistics recently. Gen Z is both most doubtful in democracy of any age group and the least religious. And I think that does make political engagement look different. I can say for myself, I am a queer, I joke lefty woman, but the most radical thing about me is that I am Catholic and that I am committed to this institution that I get why people don't want to be a part of it. I understand, I think young people also who are exceedingly welcoming for queer and trans folks look at an institution and say, I don't know. And I think the first thing that we have to do is listen to young people and hear them and say, like, what are institutions or faith communities doing wrong that you don't want to be a part of that? And then respond to that. I do think there's a social media piece that we could talk about and the way that engagement on social media can feel like social activism. When we post, when we share, we can think, oh, I did my thing, but that's not, we need to take that to the next level. And I think that's something present. And I think belonging and loneliness is something that's going on in Gen Z. But I really do think if the question is like, how can we welcome young people? listening to them and hearing their prophetic voices is really, really important. I think that Zohran Mamdani's campaign, there's a really great New York Times article about Gen Z and Zoran's campaign and the community and belonging that was found on that campaign. And so I think those are some reasons, those are some challenges, but I think for me it's about, I experience this a lot in the hospital or in college campuses, hearing why people don't want to be a part of this institution. And my goal, one of the reasons I'm very proud to say that I'm Catholic, is to provide a counter witness and hopefully be someone that brings about a slightly more liberative Catholicism. So it's a little, just couple seeds.
Okay, let me ask Mefluda. So, as a Muslim, clearly there is Islamophobic and anti-Muslim rhetoric and, sadly, actions as well, all across the board. We just had an atrocious example of a congressman from Tennessee, Representative Andy Algles, who wrote, "Muslims don't belong in American society. Pluralism is a lie." How do we stand in solidarity with you? How do we stand in solidarity together as an interfaith world, interfaith community?
Yeah, so I mean, in addition to that, you said something earlier about how the framing of the war right now is kind of being framed as a crusades, and I think that the use of Islamophobic and anti-Muslim and racializing of Muslims right now at this moment is deliberate and it's dangerous, and it's the hijacking of religion by this administration is being done for a strategic purpose, because the othering of Muslims is necessary for this kind of crusader policy and crusader approach that we're seeing right now. And I came of age in the aftermath, in the kind of whenever the so-called war on terror was going on, and we were confronted with really harmful stereotypes about Muslims then, and we're seeing sadly that those are continuing to this day. But I think what's different today is that it felt a lot more insidious then, whereas the rhetoric that we're hearing now is blatant, and it's coming from the highest echelons of the government, and this rhetoric is really harmful, and it has direct impacts. And I mean, we saw that even with under the Biden administration, with the really ruthless, horrific stabbing of the 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy, as a result of the really kind of apathetic and dehumanizing discourse around Palestinians then. What we're seeing now is even more open and blatant and Islamophobic, and I think that it's really important to recognize that this isn't just language, that this has real life impacts, and that this is going to enable hate crime, and that there's been studies about how Islamophobia spikes whenever these kind of wars occur. And there have been studies in the last couple of weeks that have talked about the kind of online increase in really harmful rhetoric and describing, Muslims as parasites and that kind of language, which we know is a precursor. We know from other instances in history is a precursor to genocide, is a precursor to really harmful and vicious acts. So I think that it's really important to be in community and educating ourselves about stereotypes and about how to counter that, and making sure that we recognize what is being said and what the purpose for that is, and really educating ourselves. And
you're so right. It not only feels different, it is different. It is blatant, it is official, it is repeated, even when people are given chances to retract. As they say, they double down and they triple down. How many times did President Trump call Somalis garbage? 3, 4, even when he was given a chance to do that. I mean, it is official, it's blatant, it is different. So we have a few minutes left here before we wrap up. We have a few questions that come in. I think the first question that has come in is one of our viewers is asking for some examples of where the work that we are all doing is actually working. I assume that probably that question reflects frustration in that we see a court win, or we see outpouring of support for a creche display, but it doesn't feel like anything's changing. Where is it working? Can you point? Can you give us some hope of where things are working?
I was at a meeting last Thursday evening over in Rosendale. It was at the Substack station, and it was organized by the Boston City Councilors as a listening session. And the neighborhood was invited to share ways that they could be present to and to help refugees in the area, but in this time of ice. And it was remarkable to see that spirit. But I see that spirit in all of these panels. After the show was over, I think a few of us are going to go to a local establishment. If anybody at home wants to join us, you will find a priest, a rabbi, and a Muslim, among others, walking into an establishment. This conversation will continue. But there was so much hope there at this meeting, and I sense that here with the work that everyone is doing. And you need to have conversations. You need to keep dialogue open. In Rosendale, there were teachers there were parents there was administrators there were politicians there were social workers there, and all of them were addressing the needs of our current refugees who are frightened now, who have seen their family members taken. What do you do when a student goes home from school and their father, the breadwinner, is gone? But who pays the rent, who gets the food, how do they stay in touch? There are so many people stepping forward who want to help and who are helping. It's amazing to see this response come about. We experienced it in our own parish after the crash.
Mm-hmm.
In our community, once people are aware of a need, I find that they step out. There's a wonderful spirit that is there, and sometimes it just takes to illuminate the need of a particular person or group that just resonates with folks. They want to see change. They want to make life better. They want to bring us to that next level of to achieve people's dignity.
One of the questions that we received, and we received it a number of times, is how do we work together? How do we break down stereotypes? And I know, Rabbi James, you told me once about an experience that you had when you spoke at a rally. And you were there for a common purpose, but
I was asked last year to speak at an immigration rights rally in the Pioneer Valley. And while I was speaking, there was some folks who raised signs and raised objection. I think identifying me as a member of the Jewish community and presuming what I might think about Israel and Israeli policy and the politics of the conflict in the Middle East. And I think it raised for me a really complex question. I actually was sitting with Representative Sabadosa, one of the local electeds in our community that we're really lucky to have in this work in the State House. And she reflected back to me the importance of what it means to resist together. And even though that might mean that we don't agree about everything all the time, I will tell you that among the closest colleagues that I work with are the interfaith partners in the Greater Springfield Interfaith Council, coming together from a variety of faith traditions, because we are so aligned in our vision for what a faithful community, what an engaged community might look like. But I think that in these moments, with the kinds of kinds of risk that we are at as a society, the importance of resisting in partnership with people is, I think, couldn't be more overstated. We need to come together with people that we have widely different views about many other things, to struggle together, to make progress, to make change, to make those, where is the work working, right? To make that work in the areas where we have common cause. I believe deeply in that, in part because I don't think that our faith traditions require us to have a Venn diagram that is just a circle over a circle. That we can be nuanced and complex, and frankly, the Jewish community doesn't believe any one thing about anything, and so I don't know that's not the line that I want to draw in the sand personally either. But I do think that where those Venn diagrams overlap and we can find common cause to engage and to work together, I think that's actually where we make gain. That's where we can show up. That's where we can stand together, and where our power will be most visible. Actually, is in the places where even amidst our complexity, even amidst our disagreement, we can still come together about the things that are critical for us to make progress on.
So we have just a few minutes left here. So this is a quick question to each of you. Comes from one of our registrants who asked, how do we live ethically in a country governed by an autocrat? So, quickly, what would be the one thing that you would encourage those who are watching and those who of good faith to do to step forward, stand in solidarity, or in her terms, live ethically in a country governed by an autocrat? Let's see. Who wants to start?
I can start.
I'll
try to go quick.
All right, Sarah.
I think the paralysis that we named at the beginning of like feeling despair and hopelessness is so real. And I guess I want to return to my opening question, which is like, what is yours to do to the audience and to ourselves? I'm constantly asking that question, and knowing that we are governed by our administration, but we still have a lot of power. And I think looking to Minneapolis is a really beautiful example of people protecting their communities. They said, our state government does not have the power to keep DHS from coming into our cities. We are going to protect our neighbors. We are going to drive our neighbors' kids to school and get them groceries, and we are going to go out and watch for ICE. And it was it's called, some people have been calling it neighborism, but this real coming together, and everyone had a different role. There were people who had higher risk tolerance, who were going out and blowing whistles with ICE, and then there were folks knitting hats. And this was inspired by 1940s, a resistance movement to the Nazi regime, and knitting these hats that were a symbol that were saying, we are with you. And then there are singing resistance groups, and then there are people bringing every one of their gifts to the space, and just knowing that if we know our neighbors, we can know what our neighbors need, and then we can work together, and just not giving in to the paralysis.
So there's hope, and it's organic hope.
Yeah, right. We create it.
All right, who's ready for Father?
I'd add to choose not to live in fear.
To choose not to live in fear.
It's so easy to live in fear and to let fear be the basis of your decisions. There's a spirit that is moving. I see it in young people. I see it in so many different sectors. And oftentimes it's when you step outside your comfort zone and you know your neighbor and you recognize a need. And there's a spirit that your heart kind of knows what to do. And to share stories,
All right, we've got two more we need some comments from. It looks like the Flutie's going to get the last word here.
As she should.
As she should, okay. The lawyer always has the last word, right?
Amen. My favorite pasuk, my favorite verse in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible says, "Evan ma'asu habonim hayta larosh pinah," that the stone that the masons rejected becomes the chief cornerstone. We will find hope. We will find success when we live that value, and when we make each person who we engage with, each person that we serve, the chief cornerstone of our work. And that's what we do every day.
And so we turn to the attorney for the last word.
So I should have given Rabbi Green the last word, but
I get the
just
last
quick-
word.
Perfect. I'll just quickly say that I wholeheartedly understand where this question is coming from, and I think that we have to give ourselves grace and know that it's not easy, and this work isn't easy, but I would urge people to do things that make you feel uncomfortable. Take the steps that need to be taken. Everyone has a different role. I'm a lawyer. Litigation does not solve everything. That is not something that we believe at all. This is a community joint effort, and everybody has a part to play. And really realizing the importance and your role as a community member and the power of organizing and the power of individuals to make change is something that shouldn't be underestimated.
Very well
Amen.
stated. Amen to all that. Very well stated. So we're at the point where we want to wrap up. I want to begin by thanking our 4 guest panelists. I trust that, like me, you found their thoughts, their ideas, their perspectives, their insights very inspiring and very stimulating, and hopefully it moves you to action and, as Father Steve said, not to fear, which unfortunately is taking so much, dominating so much, it seems, of what our public square life has become. Also want to thank all of you who joined us. Thank you for taking the time. There will be, this video is being recorded. It will be posted in a few days on our website, so we would ask that you make your friends and your acquaintances aware of this. Take a look at it and share it as widely as you possibly can. I also want to thank my colleagues here that have been helping me at A Faith That Does Justice, and also the fine production team here at Above Summit for helping us through this. This is one of 3 programs that A Faith That Does Justice runs. We call this our Social Justice Mindfulness Program. We have our weekly word. We have our Friday newsletter. You will see some writings from some of these people, Rabbi James in particular, and we may be able to get Sarah to write for us. And we welcome submissions from all, so please take a look at our weekly word, sign up for our mailing list, and also support our English for Speakers of Other Languages program and our Grab and Go program here in the Boston area. We are all volunteers, for those of you who don't know this. So every penny that you donate, virtually every penny, goes direct to service programs like our English for Speakers of Other Languages program, or our Grab and Go food assistance program, or to do things like this. So we would ask you to prayerfully consider making a donation to support our work. I'd like to wrap up by offering my own thought about this. In the Catholic tradition, this most recent past weekend, we heard the story of Lazarus and Jesus. And I think most everyone, even if you're not of the Catholic tradition, knows that story. Lazarus had died apparently of an illness. His sisters Martha and Mary were grieving his loss. And Jesus delayed a little bit in getting there. When he did arrive, he was gently rebuked by one of the sisters, but he went to show sympathy. Lazarus was his deep personal friend. He wept at his death. And he told the women, and then he told the onlookers, to have faith that Lazarus would rise. And they all thought he was talking about eternal life, and he was talking about eternal life. But he walked to the tomb. 4 days Lazarus had been buried, and they reported a stench there. And he called Lazarus out. They rolled away the stone and he called Lazarus out. And Lazarus comes out. And he's completely wrapped in bandages and linens. And this last part is what I would like you to focus on. Jesus does not untie or unwrap him. Rather, Jesus tells the onlookers, untie him and let him go. We thank you very much for joining us. We will have another Faith That Does Justice fireside chat in about a month and a half on voices from the immigrant community. We hope you join us for that. Good evening.